St. Augustine was born in the year 354 in what is now known as Algeria. Now, from a really early age, Augustine showed intelligence and an aptitude for learning. However, even though he received a good education, he never really received an education in the life of virtue. In fact, Augustine spent a lot of time around other young boys who had a negative moral influence on him. And Augustine started to seek out sexual gratification and also to boast about his conquests to his friends. An important turning point came for Augustine when he stumbled upon a book by a pagan Greek philosopher called Cicero. Now, this book had a significant influence on Augustine because it awakened in him for the first time a desire for truth and wisdom. Now, eventually, Augustine decided to move to Milan to teach rhetoric. Now, when he arrived in Milan, he met a Catholic bishop, Ambrose. He says, "I began to love him as a person, kind towards myself." And as he listened to Ambrose, he says that bit by bit, the actual substance of what Ambrose was saying began to enter his heart. This was actually the beginning of a long period of struggle for Augustine. And one of the biggest things that was causing Augustine anguish during this time was his realization that accepting God would mean accepting a life of chastity. He knew that he had to conquer his attachment to serious sin, but he just didn't know how to do it. One day, Augustine reached this point of such deep frustration. He ran outside into the garden and he just started bawling his eyes out. And then Augustine suddenly heard a voice saying, "Take up and read." He immediately opened a volume of the writings of St. Paul, and this is what he read. "Not in reveling and drunkenness, not in illicit sex and licentiousness. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ." And he says that from that moment, all the darkness of doubt vanished away. Soon after, he was baptized by St. Ambrose. Once Augustine became a Christian, he threw himself into his faith. He sold his family possessions and established a monastic community. In the year 396, Augustine was ordained Bishop of Hippo, and eventually St. Augustine died at the age of 75. His Augustinian rule became the basis for several religious orders. His writings remain spiritual classics today. St. Augustine is considered one of the greatest saints, theologians, and teachers in the history of the Church.